Chromosomes. Little strands of nucleic acids and proteins are the fundamental genetic instructions that tell us who we are at birth. Most people are born with 46 chromosomes, but each year in the United States, about 6,000 people are born with an extra chromosome, making them a person with Down syndrome. If you've ever encountered someone with Down syndrome, you know that they are some of the kindest, most joyful people you will ever meet. They truly have something extra. My name is Lisa Nichols, and I have spent the last 24 years as both the CEO of Technology Partners and as the mother to Allie. Allie has something extra in every sense of the word. I have been blessed to be by her side as she impacts everyone she meets. Through these two important roles as CEO and mother to Allie, I have witnessed countless life lessons that have fundamentally changed the way I look at the world. While you may not have an extra chromosome, every leader has something extra that defines who you are. Join me as I explore the something extra in leaders from all walks of life and discover how that difference in each of them has made a difference in their companies, their families, their communities, and in themselves. I'm excited to have Kadi Cole on the show today. Kadi is the founder of Kadi Cole and Company, a leadership development company specializing in equipping individuals and organizations. If you like this episode today, please go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen and leave us a 5-star rating. So Kadi, I am so delighted that we could make this happen. And I'm also delighted that our mutual sister and sweet friend, Judy West, connected us.
Absolutely. She's wonderful and her friends are always so wonderful. So I'm really glad to be here with you and excited about our conversation today.
We are going to have so much fun. We're going to cover so much ground. So let's just jump right in, Kadi, because we've got a lot to talk about. I just kind of want to go back to the beginning. I know that you grew up in Montana, beautiful country.
It absolutely is. They call it Big Sky Country for a reason. I actually am from the western side, which is right in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, just below Glacier National Park. And so I feel like it's our country's best kept secret. I love it and encourage everyone to go check it out.
Yes. You say there where gender roles were not very traditional.
Well, it's so funny because I live in the South now in Florida, which, is not quite the South, like the Bible Belt or anything, but a lot of people from that area live here. And so the culture has a lot of Southern connections. And I didn't realize till I moved here, all those pieces really speak a lot into how we think about ourselves, how we raise our kids, what we do in churches, what we do in schools and businesses. And, those gender roles are really significant in the South. What women do, what men do, kind of those established gender things. In Montana, I grew up for many years with a single mom who did everything. And then when my mom got married, my dad was an amazing Montana mountain man. He has a huge garden. He hunts. He did all the cooking. He did all the cars. It's just a different kind of frontier mindset where everyone works on everything together. And it's much more about skill set and capacity than it is about a fixed role. And so I think that really shaped my leadership of just going, who am I as a person? Not necessarily what things do I need to learn to be a good woman. I'm very appreciative of that culture for that reason.
Well, and I know that you talk about this and you said you've had a love of leadership and development from a very early age. And was that just watching your mom?
Really, I just think, gosh, if my mom were in her 20s or 30s right now, how different her life would have been. And she was just someone who was kind of, she was born in the 40s. She was sort of trapped in some of these gender roles, but then life forced her to step up into things that I don't think she would have chosen for herself. But she always rose to the challenge. She always knew she could figure it out. She was a survivor. She had a very strong faith. Even when she wasn't walking tightly with the Lord, she knew he was there and that he was for her. And so she could walk into things with at least confidence on the outside. So as a little girl, all I saw was this woman who would just go do what needed to get done. And I just thought that's how we all did it. So it's just such a great role model for me. And I think too, with a lot of space for wonderful men to come alongside me. I grew up in a wonderful little church in Montana of about 150 people, which now I do a lot of work with churches and companies, but churches, because a lot of that is my background. But there's, I think, pressure to grow big or to be something that's like really noticed by other people or have a giant building. But man, my life was so impacted by that community of 150 people and the amazing godly men who filled gaps for me that I couldn't fill for myself, that life had dealt us a rough hand and they just stepped in as brothers and fathers and uncles. It's everything you're supposed to get from a church family. They were my surrogate family. And so in many ways, I grew up not missing out on things a lot of my friends missed out on, even from single families or from low economic resources, or, just all the barriers I had. I just found that God supplemented those through his body.
We should do a deeper dive into that, because I grew up in a very small little church as well. And my mom and dad were both present. But yeah, that's interesting, because I grew up thinking, Katie, that I had like 100 aunts and uncles.
You did. You did.
Exactly. So let's move kind of more into what you decided to do. Now, this is something that I read about you too, that you thought you wanted to be a nuclear physicist. I think is so funny. I'm like, did you even know what that was? I mean,
I had no idea what that was. So when I was in, I think the 5th grade, I won the science fair for our county, which I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't a kid who like had some big dream. I still don't have a lot of big dreams for myself. I'm kind of up for whatever God brings me. I won this science fair. And so I was on the news, and I was really this first generation of girls where people were advocating for us to think of ourselves as capable of math, capable of science. In the town we grew up in, it wasn't very long that I was in a mixed gender PE class. I'm not even that old. I'm in my late 40s, but girls and boys still had separate PE classes. So that kind of inertia around me as sort of a first generation girl, like now we have like girls that code and things like that. So having a girl win the science fair apparently was a really big deal and landed me on the evening news. And so they're like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I take science really seriously. I'll probably, we should be able to be nuclear physicists just like the guys. So I pursued all of those things, and I joined math and science, and I did more science fairs and all these things. And so even just the timing of that, of having these sort of like doors open for me that I couldn't even appreciate at the time, it's such a good reminder to me now as I try to advocate for women in spaces where there aren't a lot of women. When they step into it, they have no idea what it took for us to open doors for them, right? It's part of being a group of the older women that are making way for younger women, or whatever you're making a way for. Kids of divorce or low economic levels, or from other countries, or English as a second language, or immigrants, whoever you're using your leadership to open the door for, they're never going to understand, but they are going to run faster because of it. Like in God's kingdom, it matters. They'll see it in heaven, right? But they may not notice it now. And it takes a mature leader to be okay with that, right? It's parenting, really, in many ways. It's all that you did for your kids. And when they're like 45 with their own kids, they're like, hey, you did a lot for me. Thanks for that. But man, the payoff takes a long time to hear that.
Absolutely. We are all standing on the shoulders of someone. That is for sure. But I love how you put that we're all opening doors in some way, whether it's with the math and science or whatever the case may be. But you didn't become a nuclear physicist. You actually became a nurse. And I know you practiced nursing for several years. And then you pivoted and went into a university where you did more leadership development and that sort of thing. But you also got a master's, didn't you, Katie?
I did. So my nursing degree, which really for me, because of, I think, sort of how I grew up, nursing was like the approved female way of being a nuclear physicist. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was falling into some patterns that I had grown up with. So it was wonderful. I still have my nursing license. I love nursing. I will probably always stay connected and dabble in it. But I ended up being recruited to a Christian university here in West Palm Beach to run their health and wellness center. And yes, eventually then I took over Res Life, became Dean of Student Development, which is all the campus life for students, and picked up a master's degree while I was there in human resource development, which is really about training adults, sort of like your human capacity in your organization or business. How do you bring training and education to equip your people to reach your mission, to hit the objectives that you have for your organization? Or in the church work, we call it reaching the mission that God has given you. How do we equip the saints for service to do that? And so I am very passionate about that work. For me, it stands on top of nursing, which is very client-centered, patient-centered. It's about health and wholeness and wellness and maximizing the life God has given us. And many times what I learned in nursing comes into direct connection to that when I'm working with leaders in leadership development, because we are whole people, mind, body, and spirit, and all of it matters. God cares about all of it. He's put all of it in us. He has instruction for us about how to steward all of those people, and the integration of those three things for me is where the magic really happens. When we have a healthy body, a healthy mind, and a healthy soul, God really has the freedom to put us where he wants us, and we can be the most fruitful with our life.
Oh my goodness, Kadi, you are totally speaking my language. I could not agree with you more. In fact, I just spoke recently to a group and I started with that. We have to take care of all those. It's like a three-legged stool, and if one of those legs is damaged or broken, it's hard to balance a two-legged stool. I so agree with that. We are multidimensional. So we cannot, even as leaders, just think of people in one way. Then you pivoted because I think you were volunteering somewhat at your church to help your pastor. And then all of a sudden, then that became a thing. And you spent 16 years in church leadership.
Yep, that's exactly right. I got recruited. I was volunteering a lot and using my vacation. And finally, they decided you should just work here. And I loved it. We were really in a unique situation. We had a very large church that started out small with 80 people, but then doubled in size every year for a significant number of years. I came on staff when we hit about 3,000, which 20 years ago was the biggest church I had ever heard of. And then grew up in ministry leadership, sort of bringing all my past experiences to a fast growing, scalable ministry organization. And so when I left 16 years later, I was executive director over multi-site. So at the time we had 23,000 people with 9 campuses that I oversaw. Plus I'd started a school of leadership. We launched a college at our church. So that whole growth curve, how do you scale an organization? How do you build culture and leadership systems to keep up with it? And the church went through a real season of innovation in its multi-site movement at that same time, which was really a privilege to be a part of. So yeah, it was quite a ride and really exciting to be a part of that.
So this church, the name is Christ Fellowship. If you are in South Florida, because how many locations are there now, Kadi? Aren't there more than 9?
I don't even know that I can keep up with them anymore. Yes, more than 9, plus our online campus, especially in COVID. It was very significant before with tens of thousands of people online. And our senior pastor had done his doctoral thesis on online engagement. And so it's always been a church that's been an early adopter of that. So even now that has really taken off. It's just beautiful to see how God continues to move things on. And I think as a leader, even when you transition out of something, the best sign of leadership is that it keeps going great after you leave. If it falls apart when you leave, you've not led, you've just done a bunch of stuff. And so I cheer and celebrate all the wins that are happening there now. It's just an honor to have been a part of it, and to still be connected with all those people is really a joy.
Right. Well, Kadi, we've got so much more that I want to talk about. You are actually an author, a multi-time author. I've got your books here. Developing Female Leaders, I believe, was your first book. Finding Your Leadership Voice in 90 Days is your latest book. And so I want to dig into this further. And for you, especially our female audience, just, how you have just developed this wonderful ministry of developing female leaders. And there's just so much that I want to dig into there. But we do need to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Kadi Cole.
Are you an IT executive with years of experience? Are you energized when you empower others? If I've piqued your interest thus far, you may be a great mentor for the TechLX program in St. Louis. TechLX prepares rising IT leaders to tackle today's challenges and prepare for tomorrow's demanding roles by pairing them with senior IT executives like yourself. Mentors receive coaching from technology partners and will be invited to all TechLX networking events featuring outstanding speakers of the IT industry. To apply, visit tpi.co/TLX.
So, Kadi, you have spent so much of your career developing female leaders. And in your book, the Developing Female Leader book, we all know about the glass ceiling, but you also talk about the sticky floor. And I'd love for you to tell our listeners, what do you mean by the sticky floor?
So those sort of invisible barriers that sometimes hold women back, they don't get promoted or get opportunities. The sticky floor are those things that happen inside our head as female leaders that keep our feet stuck to the floor. The internal dialogue that might make us question ourselves, that puts pressure on us. We're worried that we're not going to do it right. We're worried we're going to disappoint someone or embarrass ourselves. And it actually causes us to shrink back or or to hold back from the opportunities that God is bringing to us. One of my favorite studies in that book, so that's a very research-based book about gender, and I wrote it mostly for male leaders who are running organizations, particularly if you're from a faith background, because it can be very confusing about how do you open doors for female leaders and not violate some of these thoughts. And do I even think that? And what does that look like today? So the sticky floor is important. And one of the research pieces I talk about with that is how men and women apply for jobs differently or for new leadership opportunities. So whatever your context, if you're in business, if you're just looking to volunteer somewhere, when men look at a job description or an opportunity and they read through it, if they feel good of about 60% of what's on the job description, they'll apply. They kind of assume they're going to get it. They'll figure it out as they go. They'll call their dad. They'll Google it. They'll fake it till they make it. They're going to do great at this job. They walk into it with that mindset. Women are totally different. When a female leader particularly looks at a job description or a promotional opportunity, she reads through it and has to feel good of 100% of what's on the job description from the first day, or she won't even apply for the job. That's the sticky floor. In her mind, she's thinking, oh, I got to be great at all of this. And again, this is a promotion. Like, how many of us are good at a new job or a new opportunity that we've never done before? No one's good at it on the first day. So even if you're good at all of it 6 months from now or a year from now. And so there's so much that we as leaders, particularly guy leaders, can do when you see a great, strong female leader that's holding back and it's not really making sense to you. And she might even be saying things like, well, I'm so busy and my kids and my husband, right? But if you see great leadership in her, great leaders figure out how to get the right things done. I just encourage us all to reach out and have a real conversation and let her know what you see. You would be great at all of these things, or here's the job description, but we don't expect you to be good at this from the first day. We provide training. After 6 months, we'll do an evaluation and then work on the things you need to work on, or you're already doing 6 out of 10 of these. Sometimes women assume they're not really good at it, even though you see them as really good. Your level of qualifier is much lower than what she's pressuring herself to think. So you're like, you're already doing 6 of these 10 things. These other 4, I'm confident you will learn really quickly. So just reframing it based on reality and based on what you see versus what's going on in her mind that's causing her to hold back or shrink back or prevent her from going for something that she's probably qualified and could do a really great job at.
Sure. I love that. So the sticky floor is really more about us holding ourselves back, not speaking up when we should be speaking up, and those type of things. You even say concerned with how we look.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what?
Yeah.
I read one story where you said so many of the meetings you would walk in and you were the only woman. You were the only woman leader, and like you didn't look like everyone else.
Well, and sometimes those differences, we feel it and we feel like something's wrong with us. Why am I not confident? It makes us second guess ourselves. And I've spent a lot of years feeling like I was not enough instead of realizing that I'm just different. I think the way we interpret that can really say the wrong things to ourselves.
I could not agree with you more. Well, I love in this book, one of the sections is you interviewed a lot of women leaders. It's very research based. And so you came up with several best practices. And I want to kind of get into this a little bit, Kadi, and talk about it. First of all, the number one practice is get clear on your calling. And you even say in there that you love life plans. And I'm sure that's what you're doing today, in your coaching business. But discerning your calling is a journey that God unfolds as you work with him or you walk with him and navigate life. So sometimes it's not like we know necessarily what our calling is immediately, but it fleshes itself out over time. So I think we need to give ourselves grace. But tell me about life plans, because I told you I'm a huge believer in life plans. We have business plans. We have strategic plans for our businesses. Tell me a little bit about that and how you would approach that with someone.
One of the reasons I incorporated it into my business is it made such a difference for me and it makes such a difference for leaders. And part of it is because as leaders, we are problem solvers. That's one of the initial skill sets we build in our leadership toolbox is how do you solve problems? And a lot of leadership is one-dimensional, right? The thing is broken, so we get it fixed. We have more business, so we hire people. We don't have enough money, so we launch a new product. All of these things have like one one-dimensional solutions. And we go through our day kind of firing all these answers off to people. Well, the challenge is our life is not one-dimensional. And a lot of times we use our leadership hammer on our life and we can't figure out why it's not working. I'm dissatisfied, so I change careers, or I don't feel good, so I take a pill, or right. A lot of times, and what Life Plan does is it really starts to peel away the multidimensional sides of our leadership, that we're multidimensional. You got to address all of those pieces in an integrated way. And I've done a lot of those things. I'm a big analyzer. I'm a big reader. I think about my life a lot. I make goals. It's a difference between setting goals for myself that I'm striving to achieve. I feel like Life Plan is more of a discernment process, that I'm really listening to what God has been saying to me through the course of my life. I'm paying attention to all the things that are sort of like in the rearview mirror. I always say strategic planning happens for business, looking forward through the front windshield, but in your life, it happens in the rearview mirror. You get insight to where God is pointing you by connecting the dots of your past. Everything he has in your life is on purpose. There isn't a conversation. There isn't a job, there isn't a tragedy, there isn't a hardship that is outside of his control, nor outside his plan for you. And he wants to harvest from all of that, the great times and the hard times. And so we spend quite a bit of time mapping those pieces out, because when you connect the dots, you get an arrow pointing to where you should be going next. And then looking at your life holistically, I can do that for myself at a certain level. And I think if you've never done a life plan, we were talking earlier about Michael Hyatt's book, Living Forward. It's a great way to get started on that. I found for me as a leader, I could only see myself so far, right? Self-awareness really only comes through others' feedback. And I needed other people's feedback. And I needed someone who really was good at it. I needed someone who was a leader. I needed someone who moved at the same pace I moved. I needed someone who understood the complexity of my life as a leader. I needed someone who could get it. And so I found that in one of my mentors, Lance Witt, who would be a great guest on your podcast, by the way. He's written several books. He's a wonderful leadership consultant, former pastor also. He understood all of those pieces and the scale at which I was leading. And his feedback, his questions, the things he saw in my dots that were connecting that I couldn't see for myself, where he's like, you don't realize it, but you've been doing this your whole life and you just don't know it because it's so natural to you. Well, that changed everything for me about what I would go into next. So God gives us community for a reason. We do have to grow in self-awareness, but it happens through the body. It happens through others. And so part of the life plan process is having the right person speak into that, finding those voices, taking your book and then running your plan by someone. You can get that feedback in a lot of different ways. I love taking a leader through that 2-day process because I love going deep with people and really discovering where God is speaking that you haven't been able to hear him yet.
You know, sometimes it's that old adage, Kadi, that you can't see the forest for the trees, you know, because you're so close to it, right? And having somebody else from the outside looking in, I just think that's so valuable. And I always say feedback is a gift. I didn't always think feedback was a gift.
It sometimes doesn't feel like a gift.
It doesn't feel like a gift sometimes. We don't have time to go through every one of these best practices, but I do want to touch on just one, maybe two more, because I think this one is so important. One of the best practices is enough for everyone mindset. And you talk about the queen bee syndrome. And you said, you know, when women rise through roles further and further, sometimes they're not nice to the women below them. You know, I've seen this. Women seem to be that there's not enough for everyone. So they have to be competitive because there's only one of those jobs. And I think there's a better way. And personally, I believe that when one of us rises, we all rise. And it's kind of to your point, how you started. We're all making a way for that next generation or that next entourage of women moving into leadership. So I don't know what else you might want to say on that one. I just think that is so huge for women. We do not need to be so competitive.
Well, I think that does happen a lot. I know for my growth in leadership, the biggest resistance I've ever faced has been from older women, maybe not higher in the organization, but definitely in my circle of influence, because I was doing things they were never allowed to do. Sometimes they were in higher levels and didn't want to help me, and I didn't know to ask. But what the research points to is that that's not a female thing. Because I think women have gotten a bad rap for that. You know, you hear of cat fights and queen bee syndrome, and it's just so negative that women are catty. And there are some catty women out there, so I'm not excusing all women's behavior. But what the research is saying is that actually that's about scarcity. It's not about femaleness. When you are in environments where it doesn't feel like there's enough room for everyone, right? There only is tokenism. So there's one woman's role on a leadership team and they don't want any more, and everybody knows it. We're competing for that one role. Well, as people of faith, particularly, just the world is bigger than that. If we're holding things so tightly that we're living in a scarcity mindset, as if God doesn't own everything, and that if we support and encourage one another, somehow that takes away our chance at the role. First of all, that's a horrible leadership principle, because leaders are promoted when they help others achieve. So it's not even good leadership. It's not good faith experiences, right? Because it's better to give than to receive. And your human leaders are not in charge of your receiving. God is in charge of that. He will open the doors and close the doors as he sees fit. It has very little to do with other people's power. But then third, it's not good for us. If we start to think about things as small, think about things as competitive, it feeds our insecurities. It feeds our perfectionism. We got to start proving and fighting for things. Then we can't be who God has really called us to be, because he's called us to serve and help others. That's what Jesus modeled for us. That's what great leaders do. Those are the people who live abundant lives. And so all of that is really just reframing our mindset and getting out of the human tendency to fight for something and instead champion others is the way to have that enough for everyone mindset. We all win that way.
Yeah, I love that. Well, another best practice, and I don't think this is any surprise really, but invest in a support system. But the one I want you to talk about, because I had not really heard it put this way before, is rarely, if ever, play the cards.
When I give advice, this is for female leaders specifically. One of the things that can really discredit us is when out of our own sticky floor and insecurities and all that we're navigating, right? We have different seasons of life than men do. Many women are married. Many women have children. Many women are taking care of their parents. They're navigating singlehood, which is a totally different experience than being a single male. So there's a lot of things going on in our mind. And because we're full integrated people, we are thinking about all of those things as we're making work decisions. So it's easy to say things like, I need to leave work early, and we play the parent card. My kid needs me to pick them up. Or we aren't sure how to leave a job that's really toxic for us. And so we play the God card. The Lord told me to leave. Instead of being good with our opinion, I'm choosing to quit. And if they ask you why, you can be honest that this is not a healthy work environment for me. Or I'm leaving at 3:00, period. Enough said. We're volunteering information that isn't relevant to our leadership. And oftentimes it accentuates those female things. So playing the God card, playing the husband card, man, I see this happen, especially for Christian women. They get in a tough leadership spot, so they bring their husband with them to work, like in ministry or even to their job, as if they need their husband to defend them. Now, I mean, if you're getting attacked on the side of a road, I want my husband to show up. If I'm debating a budget crisis or I'm trying to advocate for myself to get more time off or a higher salary, as a leader, I need to speak up for myself. I can't play the husband card and somehow that's going to get me somewhere. It might get me a win in the short term. I might end up with a little more money or a little more flexible schedule. But in the long term, I just derailed my leadership trust and my leadership capacity.
That's the first time I'd heard it put that way, Kadi. So I want to just touch on your book, your newest book, Find Your Leadership Voice in 90 Days. This is awesome because every day you talk about something here and I love it. And I told you the one that really got me, no judgment, which I think is good. Day 54, though, is word choices. And Kadi, you and I have talked about this. Our words are so important. You know, that old saying, sticks and stones, that is so not true. I don't know who came up with that, but it's not true. I mean, words are powerful. And so this whole section here is about, you know, the words that we say.
Yes. So the Find Your Leadership Voice book is really, as I've been talking with leaders and organizations about creating systems and structures around developing female leaders, I've gotten a lot of questions from women that are like, now I've got some doors open for me. I'm taking a leadership role, but I don't think I'm very good at it. I'm nervous all the time. I'm second guessing myself. I don't know whether I should speak up or not speak up. And especially from a faith background, there's a lot of pressure, I think, to hold back or to be quiet or what a good woman looks like. And so just trying to find what is the healthy version of that. And mostly I just want women to enjoy their leadership. God gave us these gifts for a reason. He isn't looking for spirits that are second guessing and shrinking back. He wants you to live fully into who you are. Now, should you dominate? Should you be aggressive? Should you take control of every situation? No. But how do we know the difference? So the book is really sort of a delineation of how do I know when do I speak up, when do I not? How do I show up in the spaces I'm called to be in, but let go of the pressure from showing up in things that I don't care about or aren't part of my calling? How do I speak up with confidence? How do I lead well and in a fulfilling way where I honor myself, I honor God, I take care of other people, but I don't do it at my own peril? So words is a huge piece of that. And I think a lot of times we're learning how words affect other people. And I think most leaders are aware of the need to craft things correctly. I think what's important to us as we grow our own leadership voice is the words we're saying to ourselves are just as important. And women particularly spend a lot more time thinking about their impact on other people and a lot less time thinking about how their behavior is impacting them. And really, in God's kingdom, we want the win-win. Your leadership should be something that brings you joy and peace and fulfillment, and it helps other people, their recipients. If your leadership is lopsided, if all you're doing is helping all these other people and you're starving, it's not the way God designed. Now, on the flip, we see it. If I'm doing awesome and all the people who are under my leadership hate their life, that's also not good. But
Right.
for women, our tendency is to do it this way. And I think sometimes when we're coming out of a male-dominated leadership culture where men tend to be more aggressively oriented, they're raised to be aggressive, and so they're conditioned to be that way. A lot of times their leadership looks like taking care of themselves to the expense of their people, right? So all of our leadership language, probably for the last 20 years, has been speaking against aggressiveness, about putting other people first, about high EQ, about listening before you speak. Well, as a woman, when you're already conditioned by our society to be passive, we start reading leadership books, we start going to leadership trainings, and all we get the message is to be more passive, more accommodating, more flexible, because those trainings weren't written for us. What we need is assertiveness skills. We need to actually speak up more. We got to actually hold people accountable, not let them off the hook every single time they show up to work late. So this is my attempt to speak a different side of the leadership coin to a group of people, to women leaders, values-based women leaders, particularly in the marketplace or church or at home, and say, hey, you're probably doing the opposite of that. You need to speak up more. You need to actually think about how to take care of yourself in leadership. We say put your own mask on first, but the plane is still going down. So how do you put your own mask on first and then also get to the cockpit and keep everybody afloat? That's what a female leader has to do. But we have to do it in the right order. We have to do it with the right motive. It can't be from shame. It can't be from fear. It can't be from past hurts. It's got to be based on calling, based on giftedness, and based on that God-given passion.
Oh, so good. This has been so much fun. I have to ask you, what do you believe is the something extra that every leader needs?
Well, right now I'm talking a lot about leadership voice, and I think that's it. I think knowing our own unique leadership voice, doing the inner work of acknowledging and celebrating who God made us to be, but the best version of ourselves, not as an excuse, well, that's just my leadership voice, but who is it made to be? If we were still in the Garden of Eden and there was no brokenness in our world, what would my leadership voice look like? And then how can I grow myself into that? Because our uniquenesses should not create division. Our uniquenesses should bring out the best in each other. And as we start knowing who we are and walk in the confidence of our calling, we give everyone else around us not only permission, but energy to find their leadership voice and walk in the calling they have. And that's when we create together cultures. That's when we actually start to create together communities. That's when we actually start to see the unity all of us are trying to find, but we're having a tough time. I think it starts from the inside out.
And to your point, Katie, it takes work.
Yes.
I had said to somebody earlier this week, I think you just need to have a meeting with yourself. And sometimes we don't do that. We don't take the time to really do the inner work that needs to be done to do these things. So that is wonderful. Well, Katie, I want to give you the chance to tell our audience about something, if there's something that they can get involved in or whatever you want to tell our listeners about.
Sure. Well, thank you. I mean, my website, kadicole.com, you can find all sorts of resources about this, about leadership, about life plans. I actually would just love to take a minute and just encourage people that there are people in your life that you know are not living into their leadership voice. It might be women, it might be minorities, it might be children. Like, your encouragement of them matters so much. We're in such an isolated time. And so I just really want to encourage, especially leaders. You see things that they can't see. And I'm such a product of the leaders who took just a moment to help me see things not only in me, but about my life or about my potential that I couldn't see for myself, and just shining a light on it. I never even believed them at the time, but just shining a light on it made it in my brain and gave it as a possibility of my future. And so when we take the time to do that, it really does change the world.
Yes. Well, Kadi, this has been so fun. So thanks again so much for making the time to be on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for all that you're doing to help leaders. You make a difference doing this. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's show. Something Extra with Lisa Nichols is a Technology Partners production. Copyright Technology Partners, Inc. 2019. For show notes or to reach Lisa, visit tpi.co/podcast. Don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you listen.